The sun hadn't fully risen yet over the sleepy town of Cedar Hill, Georgia. Morning dew clung to the grass, and the roads were still quiet, except for the soft purr of a worn-down 1989 Buick Electra making its way along County Route 12. Behind the wheel was a man who didn't belong. At least, not in the eyes of Officer Rick Denham. He noticed the car before he saw the driver. Beat up, out of place. The kind of car you'd expect to see abandoned, not cruising calmly through this nice part of town. And then he saw him. An elderly black man, alone, dressed in a plain brown cardigan and slacks, no designer watch, no briefcase, just a thermos of coffee sitting beside him and a calm expression on his lined face. Denham narrowed his eyes. Something about the image irritated him. He tapped the lights. The cruiser behind the Buick lit up red and blue. The car slowed to a smooth stop by the side of the road. No sudden movements, no sign of guilt or panic, just serenity. Denham stepped out, adjusted his belt, and strolled up with practiced swagger. "Morning," he said, tapping on the window. "License and registration." The window rolled down halfway. The man inside offered a nod. "Of course, officer." His voice was deep, measured, cultured in a way Denham couldn't quite place, but immediately disliked. The man reached into the glove compartment slowly, deliberately, and handed over his documents. Name, Harold L. Ellison, age 72, residence, Washington, D.C. Denham scoffed. "What brings you down here, Mr. Ellison?" Harold smiled politely. "Visiting family. My sister's buried just a few miles from here." That should have been the end of it, but Denham leaned in. "You from D.C., huh?" His tone sharpened. "Don't see many folks driving cars like this around here, especially not folks like you." Harold raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Denham tapped the roof of the car. "Pop the trunk." "Is there a reason, officer?" Denham's jaw clenched. "You questioning me?" "No, sir. Just asking if I'm being detained or—" "Pop the damn trunk." Harold sighed and pulled the lever. Denham opened the trunk and rummaged through bags of clothing, old books, and a folded American flag encased in glass. He frowned. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a worn leather briefcase with brass initials, HLE. "A gift," Harold replied calmly. "From my wife long ago. Are you a preacher?" "No." "Retired teacher? Veteran?" "I served, in a different capacity." That answer irked Denham even more. He shut the trunk with a little more force than necessary, walked back to the window and leaned in again. "You know, driving that slow through this part of town can be considered suspicious. You could have been casing homes, looking for opportunities." Harold turned toward him with clear, intelligent eyes. "I was admiring the magnolias," he said simply. Denham flushed red. "I don't think you realize how close you are to spending the rest of your trip in a holding cell, sir." Harold didn't flinch. He just blinked slowly. "Is that so?" Denham stepped back. "Sit tight." He walked back to his cruiser, muttering something under his breath. Meanwhile, a young woman across the street, on her way to open the cafe, had been watching. She held her phone up, recording. The frame showed an elderly black man sitting quietly in a car, being questioned, while a younger white officer paced angrily. The caption she typed would later go viral. "He's calm. The cop isn't. Guess who's the real threat here?" Back in the cruiser, Denham called it in. The dispatcher responded flatly. No outstanding warrants, no red flags. But Denham wasn't satisfied. He walked back again. "I'm gonna need you to step out of the car." Harold opened the door with a quiet sigh and slowly stood. His back is straight, hands visible, posture dignified. "Spread your arms," Denham barked. "Officer." "Do it," Harold complied. Denham patted him down roughly. More force than necessary. No weapon, no drugs, nothing. Harold straightened his collar and looked the officer in the eye. "You've done your job, officer. Am I free to go now?" Denham stared at him. Something about the man unnerved him, but he couldn't name it. Finally, he sneered. "Yeah, go on." Harold opened his car door and paused. Then, looking over his shoulder, he said, "I won't report you. But perhaps you should ask yourself, what if today you pulled over the wrong man?" And with that, he drove away. Denham stood there watching, puzzled by the man's composure, unaware that within 48 hours, that same quiet man would be presiding over a federal inquiry, with Officer Rick Denham's name on the docket. 2 days had passed. Cedar Hill moved on, like small towns always do. News barely rippled beyond the gas station gossip and Facebook group rumors. But Officer Rick Denham hadn't moved on. Something about that old man had crawled under his skin and refused to leave. The way he looked at him, like he'd already seen how this would end. That soft-spoken confidence, that refusal to be rattled, it felt disrespectful. The name Harold Ellison kept ringing in his mind, so that night, he searched for it. At first, just noise, an obituary for a woman named Lorraine Ellison who died 10 years ago. Likely the wife he'd mentioned. Then, something else. A blog post from a law student mentioning Justice Harold L. Ellison and a quote from a Supreme Court opinion on racial profiling. Rick's hand froze on the mouse. No, it couldn't be the same man. He clicked through. Picture. Black and white, the man in a robe, old, stern, same eyes, same damn calm. Suddenly, the blood drained from Denham's face. He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a veteran. He was a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court. The next morning, a dark sedan pulled into the parking lot of the Cedar Hill Sheriff's Department. Out stepped Harold L. Ellison, alone. No security detail, no suit. Just a gray cardigan over a blue button-up and polished loafers. He walked slowly, like time wasn't chasing him. Inside, Denham was pouring himself a coffee when the receptionist whispered, "That guy from the other day is here. He's asking for you." Denham nearly dropped the cup. He walked into the front lobby, eyes darting like a guilty child. "Mr. Ellison? Justice Ellison, I." Harold raised a hand gently. "No need for titles here, officer." Denham swallowed hard. "Why are you here, sir?" "To speak with you, privately." Denham nodded and led him to an unused interview room. Once inside, he shut the door. Harold sat down and folded his hands. "You've realized who I am," Denham nodded stiffly. "I didn't know. If I had, you would have treated me differently." He didn't ask, he stated. Denham said nothing. Harold leaned forward, elbows on the table. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a gavel. "You assumed, based on my car, my clothes, my skin. You presumed authority over me without justification. You humiliated me. You laid hands on me when there was no cause." Denham opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm not here to ruin you, Officer Denham," Harold continued, "but I want to tell you something I think you need to hear." He paused. "I'm not going to report you, but someone else already did." Denham blinked. "What do you mean?" "That young woman recording from across the street? She posted it. It's already circulating. A few million views, I'm told." Denham's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "But that's not why I'm here," Harold said. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about responsibility." Denham scoffed, trying to regain some footing. "Look, I didn't hurt you. I didn't arrest you. It wasn't even." "You didn't have to hurt me physically to do damage," Harold interrupted. A silence hung between them. Then Harold stood. "I came to give you a chance to grow. You see, most people don't get a warning before the reckoning. Consider this yours." As he reached the door, Denham couldn't hold it in. "Why? Why would you give me that?" Harold turned around, hand on the knob. "Because someone once gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it, and because if I strike back every time someone wrongs me, I become no better than the system I'm trying to fix." Then he left. That afternoon, the Cedar Hill Police Department received a call. Not from the press, not from the local government, from Washington. An invitation, no, a summons for Officer Denham to appear at a federal hearing on police conduct, hosted by a bipartisan subcommittee on racial profiling. The date was set. 3 weeks from now. And sitting at the head of that panel would be none other than Justice Harold L. Ellison. Across the country, phones lit up. The clip of the old man and the officer had hit CNN, then MSNBC, then even Fox, which tried spinning it as a misunderstood traffic stop. But most people saw it clearly. A black man, elderly, dignified, cooperative, harassed for simply existing. And then, the twist. He was one of the most powerful legal minds in the country. Back at his motel, Harold sat by the window with a book in hand. He didn't check the news, didn't post on social media. He just watched the trees sway. His clerk texted him from D.C., "Do you want me to prep your statement for the hearing?" He replied, "No, I already said what needed to be said. I'll just repeat it, under oath." And with that, he sipped his coffee and waited. Not for revenge, but for the reckoning that would come from letting the system see itself in the mirror. Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill, Russell Senate Office Building, Hearing Room 3B. 3 weeks had passed since that quiet morning in Cedar Hill, Georgia, when Officer Rick Denham made a mistake he couldn't walk away from. Today, the halls of Congress buzzed with nervous energy. Reporters crowded the doors. Legal aides scrambled with notes and microphones. The banner above the chamber read, "Federal Hearing on Racial Profiling and Abuse of Authority in Policing," and one name commanded every whisper in the room: Justice Harold L. Ellison, Associate Justice, United States Supreme Court. Inside the hearing room, Officer Denham sat stiffly at the second witness table, no longer in uniform. No badge, no swagger. Just a borrowed suit and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack stone. Seated high above the chamber, wearing a black judicial robe and a face carved from silence, was the man Denham had once made stand on the side of a Georgia road like a suspect. Harold Ellison didn't look angry. He looked resolved, still, steady, unflinching. The kind of presence that didn't need to raise his voice because the silence said everything. Senator Luis Ramos, chairing the committee, leaned into his mic. Today, this bipartisan subcommittee convenes to address a matter not just of policy, but of principle. Racial profiling, unchecked authority, and the treatment of minority citizens by law enforcement. He turned to the man seated at the center of the front panel. We are honored to be joined by someone whose life's work has shaped American justice. Justice Ellison, the floor is yours. Harold stood slowly, removed his glasses, and approached the microphone with the calm gravity of a judge, not just a witness. 3 weeks ago, he began, I was pulled over on a quiet road in Georgia. I broke no law. I posed no threat. I did not resist, nor did I provoke. I complied. I was polite, and yet I was questioned, searched, and degraded, all because I didn't look like I belonged. Murmurs stirred in the crowd. I was asked why I was there. I was told I was suspicious. I was treated like a criminal, not because of what I'd, but because of what I looked like. He paused, locking eyes with Denham. I did not reveal who I was that day. Not because I feared the consequences, but because I wanted to see who he would be without knowing mine. Denham dropped his gaze. His throat moved like he was swallowing fire. Harold turned to face the senators. I am not standing here to demand punishment. I am here to raise a question. If a 72-year-old black man with no criminal record, a war veteran, and a Supreme Court justice can be treated this way, what is happening to the people who don't have a robe, a title, or a camera? He let that question hang like smoke in the air. We don't suffer from a lack of laws. We suffer from a lack of accountability, from a lack of courage to confront what we don't want to admit, that the badge can become a weapon when not worn with honor. Senator McCullen leaned in. Justice Ellison, would you have spoken out if no one had recorded the encounter? Harold nodded solemnly. No, I wouldn't have, because I knew my reaction would become the story, not his actions. So what changed? Harold's voice softened but gained weight. I saw myself in every young black man pulled over for no reason. Every woman is forced to explain her right to exist in a space. In every person silenced by fear. And I realized, if I don't speak now, then why did I ever take the oath? Then it was Denham's turn. He walked to the witness seat like a man approaching a courtroom. Not to testify, but to confess. He sat down, hands shaking. Senator Ramos leaned forward. Officer Denham, do you have anything to say to Justice Ellison? Denham cleared his throat, and for the first time, his voice cracked. I was wrong. Gasps rippled through the room. I judged him by his appearance. I profiled him. I saw a black man in an old car and assumed the worst. I thought I had the power. I didn't know who he was, but that's the problem, isn't it? It shouldn't have mattered. He turned to Harold. I'm sorry, truly, deeply. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. Harold didn't flinch, didn't nod. He simply spoke. Apologies are a beginning, but change is the destination. The hearing made headlines nationwide. The video clip of Harold's testimony went viral. News anchors replayed his line, "The badge can become a weapon when not worn with honor," on every major network. Twitter lit up with hashtag Justice Ellison. Protesters held signs with his face next to the Constitution. Law schools printed his statement and taught it in ethics courses. A middle schooler in Chicago wrote an essay titled, "If he can be a justice, maybe I can too." Back in the hallway, as Harold exited the chamber, his clerk whispered, "Did it feel good? Watching him break like that?" Harold stopped, looked at the Capitol dome through the window, and replied, I didn't come here to break him. I came here to show him what the law looks like when it walks calmly, speaks softly, and remembers who it serves. Then he turned, walked down the marble hallway, and disappeared into history. 3 days after the hearing, the video clip of Justice Harold Ellison went viral again. But this time, it wasn't the footage from the Georgia roadside. It was a 17-second soundbite from the Senate floor, now stitched over slow piano music. Apologies are a beginning, but change is the destination. It swept across TikTok, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Not just as a moment, but a movement. Back in Cedar Hill, Officer Rick Denham returned to the station for the first time since the hearing. No one spoke. Some nodded. Others avoided eye contact. His desk sat untouched, except for the official memo, placed on administrative leave pending federal review. Denham stared at it, no protest, no anger, just a slow, bitter inhale. He went outside, sat on the front steps, and opened his phone. Hundreds of messages, some vile, some empathetic. But one caught his eye. It was from Harold. It's not too late to become a better officer, but it starts with knowing why you wore the badge in the first place. There was no judgment in the words, no victory lap, just a door left slightly open. In D.C., Harold Ellison didn't give a single interview. He declined CNN, declined 60 Minutes, declined the White House press room. He returned to his chambers, resumed hearing cases, and walked to work the same way he always had, alone, with a thermos of black coffee and a worn leather briefcase. But the country wasn't done with him. College campuses invited him to speak. High school civics teachers taught lessons using his story. Even churches read his testimony aloud on Sunday mornings. A meme of his face, next to the quote, "Speak softly but write the law," circulated on protest signs and legal blogs. At a town hall in Chicago, a mother stood up, tears in her eyes, and said, "I've told my son for years, stay quiet, stay calm, stay safe." But Justice Ellison showed him that calm doesn't mean weak, and silence doesn't mean surrender. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice launched a quiet review into Officer Denham's department. Not just for profiling, but for past complaints that were quietly dismissed. In 2 months, 3 officers resigned. 2 others were transferred. A mandatory body cam and de-escalation training policy was signed into county law. No marches, no riots, just reform, quiet, steady, and signed in ink. And Denham? He didn't quit. He showed up. He volunteered for every training session, even the ones not required. He stopped interrupting. He started listening. One day, a rookie asked him, "Why are you doing this? You're not even back on the job." Rick looked down for a moment, then answered, "Because the man I pulled over? He didn't just show me who he was, he showed me what I wasn't." One morning, 5 months later, Denham received a letter. Handwritten. "Officer Denham, I read that you've stayed on the path, that you're doing the work. That matters. Redemption isn't owed, it's earned. Stay the course. HLE." There was no return address, just the initials. In the final weeks of the Supreme Court's term, Justice Ellison dissented in a 5-4 decision involving qualified immunity for law enforcement. His written dissent, sharp, elegant, and searing, was quoted across the nation. "The Constitution does not change when a citizen looks poor. It does not bend when a person is old or tired or black, and justice must not yield to fear masquerading as protocol." Legal scholars called it one of the greatest dissents in modern history. But Harold never said a word about it publicly. He let the words speak for themselves, just like he always did. On the anniversary of the traffic stop, a young journalist tracked him down, asked for 5 minutes. To everyone's shock, Harold agreed. In a small park in D.C., the journalist asked, "Do you think you changed that officer?" Harold sat quietly on the bench for a moment, watching squirrels chase each other under the oaks. Then he said, "I didn't change him. The mirror did. I just made sure he looked." Officer Denham helping at a community cookout, laughing with black families. A classroom full of students watching Harold's Senate clip, taking notes. A mural painted on a brick wall. Justice Ellison's silhouette under the words, "Let the law speak, not your fear." Harold, sitting quietly at the Lincoln Memorial, looking out, not for recognition, but reflection. Because sometimes the most powerful blow isn't the gavel, it's the silence that follows. When a man who could destroy you chooses instead to teach you how to stand. Autumn came early that year in D.C. The air turned crisp, the trees blazed gold and crimson, and the steps of the Supreme Court echoed under the weight of history, once again. Justice Harold Ellison walked those marble steps for the last time, not because he had to, but because he had decided it was time. 73 years old, 45 years in law, 15 on the highest bench in the land. And now, quietly, without fanfare, he was leaving. Not with a press conference, but with a handwritten letter delivered to the Chief Justice's desk. My time here has never been about being seen. It's been about making sure others are. That was the only quote he allowed to be published. Back in Cedar Hill, a plaque was mounted on the wall outside the police department. This station honors the power of humility, the pursuit of justice, and the capacity of one man's silence to change an entire system. In recognition of Justice Harold Ellison, it wasn't Rick Denham's idea, it was the town council's. But Denham was the one who insisted the words be engraved in steel, not brass, so it wouldn't shine more than the truth it holds. Months later, in a rural community center, Harold spoke to a room of teenagers. No cameras, no suits, just him, a chalkboard, and a folding chair. A girl raised her hand. "Why didn't you yell at the cop who pulled you over?" Harold smiled, the corners of his eyes folding like worn pages. Because yelling wouldn't have taught him anything. But showing him who he really was, that did. Later that evening, alone in his modest apartment, Harold sat by the window with a pen in hand, writing a letter to no one in particular. A habit he picked up when his wife passed. Letters she would have read, had time allowed. Lorraine, he apologized again today. This time in person. No cameras, just two men who once stood on opposite sides of a badge. He told me he's mentoring new recruits now. He said he tells them, you don't have to fear the people you serve. I didn't answer right away, I just listened. And I realized, maybe that's all I ever wanted him to do. In law schools across the country, his dissent from the qualified immunity case was taught not for its legal argument, but for its moral clarity. One professor said, Justice Ellison didn't write law. He wrote a legacy, in ink that stains your conscience. On the first day of a new term, a freshly appointed black female justice stood in Harold's old office, placing his photo on her desk. She whispered, I won't let your silence be forgotten. And in the very town where it all began, a young boy rode his bike past the corner where a Buick Electra once sat parked by flashing lights. He looked up at a mural painted on the brick wall above it. It showed Harold Ellison, standing tall, with a faint halo of sunlight behind him. His quote beside it read, the law doesn't need to scream to be heard. It just needs to be just. The boy didn't know everything that had happened, but he knew enough to feel it. He pedaled home faster, because sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't start with sirens or protests or fists in the air. Sometimes they start with an old man in a quiet car, refusing to be angry, refusing to be small, and choosing instead to be unforgettable. Not with noise, but with silence.